I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Friday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Norm Finkelstein. He is a political scientist, activist, former professor, and author. Thank you so much for coming on, Norm.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start off with the Democratic primaries. I'm not sure if you've heard about this. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson have decided to come forward and primary challenge Joe Biden. If we look back on the Bernie Sanders experience, him running through the Democratic Party 2016 and 2020, do you feel that there is any value for Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. to run through the Democratic Party?
Well, there's always value. It's a historic tradition on the left to always run. 1 second. Give me a chance. There's, for some reason, I don't know where it came from, but my voice is hoarse. There's always been a tradition on the left to run candidates in presidential elections and also in local elections in order to use the occasion of an election to reach a broad public. You have a much bigger chance of reaching a broad public in an election cycle than you have in a non-election cycle. So there's always a value to that. And I would certainly counsel everybody to participate in that process who's willing to invest the time and resources to it. Now, if the question is whether I think they have a, so to speak, snowball's chance in hell of winning, that's an altogether separate question. In my opinion, no. And this is not to pour cold water on anybody, but in my opinion, no, for a very simple reason. There were two factors that, as it were, enabled Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020. Factor number one was his, if you want to call it, his class struggle platform. It was fundamentally about redistributing the wealth and also simultaneously improving the lives of ordinary people. And he eventually came up with a set of planks, Green New Deal, abolish student debt, abolish student tuition, Medicare for all. He came up with several planks which reached a very broad audience, which resonated for probably the majority of the American people and maybe even a supermajority of the American people. But that was one factor. The other factor is more, so to speak, nebulous. And that was in a American situation where people are so cynical about politics, Bernie had a half-century track record, actually more than a half-century track record. And so he became credible because he was consistent. They used to say about during when Bernie first went out in the campaign trail in 2016, people would roll their eyes and say, oh, Bernie, he's been saying the same thing since the 1960s. And in fact, that was his selling point, that he wasn't trimming his sales or attacking in order to get a favorable outcome. He had stood fairly firm in his beliefs, and the American people were now ready for those beliefs. Uh, Bernie was an unusual case because it wasn't the candidate who rose to the times. It was actually the reverse. The times rose to Bernie. Bernie stood still for about 60 years, but our economy did not stand still. Beginning in the 1980s, there's what's called a long stagnation in wages, such that nowadays about 80% of the population are doing worse than their parents did. So uh, he had the advantage of that long track record, which resonated for people otherwise cynical about the political process. The same just can't be said of Marianne Williams and Robert Kennedy Jr. I'm not going to pass judgment on their specific platforms as well as the statements they have made in the last couple of months. Setting that aside for the moment, as I said, that second factor of consistency, which then produced credibility, or credibility born of consistency. If he didn't have that, I don't think he had a chance. So the fact that Marianne Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. don't have that consistency that and thence credibility, I don't see any possibility whatsoever. But that being said, as I initially pointed out, it's always been a staple of the left to use the election cycle to send your message, to transmit your message, to broadcast your message. And certainly that's a valuable thing to do. I wish more people on the left would do the same thing, take advantage of the election cycle. I wish more credible candidates would enter on the Democratic side. I think Joe Biden is a disaster waiting to happen. People forget that Donald Trump would have easily won in 2020 if it wasn't for that colossal self-inflicted wound called COVID. If he hadn't carried on in such a crazy way during the COVID crisis, and then simultaneous was the crash in the economy. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, people in politics shouldn't indulge in ifs because you never know. But this was really just a fluke. COVID was a fluke. Had it not been for COVID, Trump would have trounced Bernie in the debates. You know, Bernie came up with some nicknames, some of which were not very successful, like Crazy Bernie. I should say Trump came up with some nicknames, some of which were not very successful. They didn't stick, such as Crazy Bernie. Well, Bernie was plainly not crazy, you know. But a couple did stick. Pocahontas stuck, and Sleepy Joe stuck. And it's going to stick again in this election title. I don't even think you should call him Sleepy Joe anymore. You should call him Comatose Joe. And I think it's a disaster waiting to happen. And the way the Democrats are currently going about it, thinking that you're going to somehow knock Trump out with all of these scandals, is just so ridiculous. If that's your best, if that's the best you can put forth, that you think by indicting him on this and indicting him on that, I mean, as many people have said, Trump has a long history with these scandals. They didn't affect his electoral prospects before. They're not going to affect them now. And there is a very real question, and I know people are not allowed to say it, but I feel it needs to be said. And I say it with a certain amount of, reservation, but I'm not convinced that a Trump presidency on one critical variable, namely war and nuclear war, I'm not convinced that a Trump presidency would be worse than a Biden presidency. The Biden administration is now on an inexorable course towards war with China.
Yep.
And you hear it every single day. I just now was looking at YouTube, and now it's Niall Ferguson giving a lecture on, he's like the senior, he's a senior historian. I don't know if he's at Hoover now, he was at Harvard, but he's very influential. And every lecture now by these administration people and those who are advising the administration are focusing on the war with China. It's practically spoken of now as if it's a given. Now, a war with China will be terminal for humanity. These are madmen and mad women, or let's just call them, they are lunatic people. And you can say 1,000 things about Trump's lucidity, his mental lucidity, and I'm going to go along with every one of them. But am I convinced that a Trump administration would, in the same manner and the same inexorability, am I convinced that Trump would go to war with China? I don't think so. I also don't believe there would have been a war in the Ukraine had Trump been in power. And
Careful when you say things like that. People might call you right wing.
Well, I'm not saying it's necessarily for good reasons, but that's just not. Trump is an eccentric personality. Hello?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Trump is an eccentric personality. He's very unpredictable. And so far as I can judge, I can't see that he would have gone for the war in the Ukraine. It just doesn't seem to me there was a highlight. I could give you specific reasons, but I'm not going to, do that now because it's pure speculation. But I don't think that would have happened. And now Trump, as you know already from the town hall, CNN town hall, he said, if I were in office, there wouldn't have been a war in Ukraine. First of all, I think there's a good possibility that's true. And secondly, it's going to be a killer punch against Biden, because this war in the Ukraine has turned into a royal debacle for the foreign policy establishment. In my opinion, I can't prove it, but in my opinion, however this whole confrontation with Russia began in 1991 with the implosion of the Soviet Union, however it began, and it seemed to have began as a kind of default mechanism, namely, we won the Cold War, you lost the Cold War, ergo, we're in charge and you are our vassal. That's how people saw it. We won the war and therefore we get to do as we choose. And one of the consequences of that was this juggernaut to expand NATO right up until Russia's border. Now, that's how it started. And as I said, I kind of think it was a default setting. We won, you lost, we do what we want to do, you have no say. However, beginning in the 2000s, an important change did set in. If you recall, during the Obama administration, there was talk of Obama kept referring, he never was able to follow through on it, but he kept referring to this thing he called the Asian pivot. The Asian pivot. And the Asian pivot meant we're now going to focus on China. And at some point, it became painfully clear to our ruling elite or ruling class, whichever you prefer, it became painfully acute to them that there was no way to stop China in a, so to speak, peaceful competition between, so to speak, the two systems. That the only way to stop China was militarily. And at that point, Russia was seen as a crucial force to neutralize. So the two potential land masses, Russia and China, would be separated because Russia would be neutralized by this NATO encirclement of Russia. So, in my view, what's happening now, it has very little to do with Russia. First of all, Russia is not a powerful state in conventional terms, in terms of its economic power is the main measure of a country's power in the modern world. China is a large landmass. Russia is a large landmass. Russia has a rich imperial history, but besides defending its own borders, over which it's going to be ruthless, apart from defending its own borders, Russia doesn't have any imperial ambitions, not because they're saints, but because they don't have the wherewithal for imperial ambitions. It was very striking to me when I was reading the Russian revolutionist Leon Trotsky. I was reading his writings when Stalin invaded Finland in 1938-39. And the Russian invasion of Finland in many ways, or I should say the Soviet invasion of Finland, in many ways resembled the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, we all think of Stalin as a ruthless tyrant, and in fact, he was a ruthless tyrant. But Trotsky made an interesting observation. And of course, Trotsky knew Stalin personally and knew him inside out. And he knew Russia from firsthand experience. He, along with Lenin, being credited with the leaders of the Russian Revolution. And Trotsky said, and now I'm quoting him, he said, Stalin is the most conservative leader in Europe. Now, allow me to repeat that. Stalin is the most conservative leader in Europe. So we're all taught about permanent revolution, spreading the revolution. Stalin is a Bolshevik, besides also being a tyrannical dictator. But Trotsky says not so. He says Stalin is acutely aware of how weak Russia is economically, how weak it is militarily, and he's also acutely aware of how weak and unpopular his regime is, that after the collectivization, which included the massive death in Ukraine, after the collectivization, after the purge trials, you put it all together, Russia and the Russian people are seething with resentment and anger. So Stalin knows this regime, you just touch it and it's going to collapse. And I think the same is basically true of Russia today. Remember, Putin was the former head of the KGB. He knows Russia from the inside. He knows how weak it is economically. And also, as we've now seen in the Ukraine, its military force is not quite what one might have expected of Russia. So those factors borne in mind, I don't think that Russia poses any threat outside its borders. Yes, it's going to be hugely repressive inside. So I don't think the war has anything to do with fear of Russian expansion any more than there was a realistic fear of Soviet expansion under Stalin. The war, as I said, began as was sometimes called the victor's peace. And the victor's peace in this case was after the implosion of the Soviet Union. The feeling was Russia lost. We don't have to defer to any of its desires, any of its concerns, any of its fears. You lost. We do as we choose. But now I think it's metamorphosed into something else. It's setting up, it's placing all the pieces on the grand chessboard. All the pieces are being arranged on the grand chessboard to prepare for the war with China. And having
Well,
said, yeah, just
let's
having
come back.
said, yeah, just
Yeah.
I'll just complete the thought. Having said all that, I think another Biden administration poses a real threat to the survival of humanity. Now, people will say, but another Trump administration will pose a threat to humanity from a different direction, namely climate change. And I have to agree that's true. I'm not going to deny that. My credo in life has always been don't quarrel with facts. And I recognize we have the precedent of the first Trump administration. The problem of climate change and his handling of it is a catastrophe. I understand that. But if you were to say to me, there are three major existential crises facing Americans now: one, climate change; two, nuclear war; and three, an economy which has reached an impasse for about 80% of the American people. I would say of the three, at this moment, I'm saying just at this moment, I think the biggest threat is a nuclear war. And I think the Biden administration is pushing us closer to it than a Trump administration would have.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I want to pivot back to this idea of the value of running through the Democratic Party, because I totally get where you're coming from, but what I have seen on my end, for those of us who were volunteers, those of us who canvassed and phone bank, for these progressive candidates, what I have seen happen is that there's all this energy poured into a campaign, and it seems to take away from organizing any type of movement or mutual aid efforts that can be done on the outside. That's part of the problem that I have, is that there will be that shift where instead of people focusing on what they can do with these outside movements, they tend to focus on a campaign and believe that if this person wins, this is going to be your hero and your savior. That's one problem. The second problem that I have is the actual system that's in place. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the DNC fraud lawsuit. Now, this is coming from DNC attorney Bruce Spiva. So he said there's no such thing as a Democrat. The DNC just encourages people to vote for the Democratic Party. No one has any right to any expectation of a fair election. If the DNC wishes to select a candidate in the primaries instead of a free election process, that is their right. Donating money to Bernie Sanders doesn't mean you thought that money was going to assist him to win the primary. You have no right to think the DNC was obligated to follow their own charter and internal policies about elections. So what's important about this is this piece right here as well. Discussion of and any disputes with the DNC do not belong in a transparent process in a court of law. The DNC is a private organization, which should never be asked to engage in the discovery process or have to reveal any of its internal workings or strategies should they decide to select a candidate rather than allow a fair election of a candidate. It's the system that's the problem. We watched Bernie Sanders. He was cheated in 2016. He won every county in West Virginia, and the superdelegates decided to give that state to Hillary Clinton anyway. So these are the challenges that you come up against if you're running through the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is also corporate as well, but I think it really gets a lot of people's hopes up, like we did with Bernie Sanders. We were really excited, energized, thousands of people. We could have really had a strong mass outside movement, and that could have continued after Bernie lost, more so the first time, but also the second time. We should have continued that, and we could have taken that energy and built a strong third party movement. So that's the problem that I have with the value in running through the Democratic Party, because it's already rigged against you.
First of all, I think the point you make is an important one, and I wouldn't be at all dismissive of it. As I see it, let me just begin as I did earlier with what I call the socialist tradition, or the left tradition, forget even socialist tradition, the left tradition. I was recently rereading the works of Rosa Luxembourg, which are currently being translated into the English language, the collected works. And one of the things that struck me in reading her, for those of you listeners who don't know her, and I can understand why, it's a century ago, Rosa Luxembourg was one of the leading figures of the revolutionary Marxist tradition back at the turn of the 20th century. She was an enormously impressive figure, probably since Karl Marx, the most impressive figure that the socialist movement ever produced. Marx's first biographer, his name was Franz Mehring, Mehring. He once commented about Rosa Luxembourg. He said that she's the most impressive figure for the socialist movement has produced since Karl Marx. And then he went on to say, if that's not recognized, it's because her colossal mind, her head, stands on the shoulders of a woman. That had she not been a woman, the impressiveness of her would have become transparent. She was, by any reckoning, a stupendous historical figure. In any event, when Rosa is talking about what are the tasks, what are the responsibilities, what are the obligations of being a socialist, she says the tasks are twofold: educate and organize. Educate and organize. And the two always go together. Now, that brings me to your question. You say that it becomes a waste of time because you might be carrying on the educating function, but once because I said you can transmit your ideas, you can broadcast your ideas in the election, but what you said, which in my opinion is entirely correct, once you lose, and you're going to lose, if you don't organize, all the energy is going to dissipate. If you don't use the opportunity of educating to at the same time use the opportunity to organize, which means forming a party or forming some institution, then you're entirely correct. Now, what happened with the Bernie campaign? See, the Bernie campaign was very deceptive. I'm not blaming him for it. I'm saying it wasn't clearly, I think, understood. Bernie was running a primary campaign. That is, he wants a Democratic nomination. But he also said simultaneously he was building a revolution. That is, he called it our revolution. What happened with the Bernie campaign was he did organize, eventually became a very successful grassroots campaign. However, the revolution part was lost. There was no enduring organization. Remember what Rosa says, educate. Bernie was, we have to admit it. I don't like all the naysayers saying, oh, he was a fraud from the first place and it was a waste of time and I told you so. I don't go for that. There can be no question in my mind whatsoever that he used that national platform to educate people to a degree which is unparalleled in American history since the Eugene Debs campaign. He was the one that put Medicare for all on the national agenda. He was the one that put big pharma on the national agenda. He was the one who called out Goldman Sachs and all sorts of other people as crooks, a bunch of crooks. Now, I've been around a long time, and I can assure you, even 10 years ago, that would have been, let's call it now, it's still 10 years ago, that would have been unthinkable on national television or any national media. Bunch of crooks calling out the most powerful institutions of our country as being a gang of crooks. That was unthinkable. That was education. The problem, and I will never, ever be dismissive of what a breakthrough that was in the United States. And he put things on the agenda like abolishing student debt. Those were spectacular gains in education. The problem was the organization. It didn't translate into an organization. And then what happened was exactly what Bernie predicted. See, that's the kind of irony of what happened with Bernie Sanders. Throughout the primary, Bernie was constantly confronted with one question, which was a perfectly obvious question. The question was, Bernie, how do you think you could possibly get your platform through Congress? And that was, of course, true. This is, forget about the Republicans. You're not going to get that platform through Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. Forget it. It's dead on arrival. And Bernie gave the most cogent and convincing answer possible. He said, of course I can't get it through that platform if I stick by the rules of how things are run. He says we have to bring masses of people in the streets. If we bring people into the streets, we have a chance. It's called the Civil Rights Movement, and it's called the New Deal, which were massive mobilizations from below that forced an agenda which otherwise would never have happened. My good friend, the American Marxist economist, Paul Sweezy, he was the greatest living Marxist economist of my generation. And he says people forget that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he said he was quite conservative the first 2 years in office. It was only when the CIO began to organize and there was mass workers' mobilizations from below that the New Deal as a radical idea started to catch hold. So Bernie was, of course, right. But what happened? What happened was when Bernie got into office, he had two options. One was to try to foment that mass movement to push through a radical platform. The other one was to whisper in Biden's ear. He thought, if I stayed close to Biden, Biden respects me, we're family friends, which they were, that I could play the role of articulating the left point of view, and we can get some things. Well, and there was no middle ground, because you can easily imagine, Sabrina, what would happen if Bernie Sanders had called millions of people into the streets, tell them to erect, Occupy Wall Street, erect campsites, get arrested, stop traffic, the whole 9 yards. I think we're gone lost. Yeah, the whole 9 yards. Could you imagine Biden's reaction? Could you
But he
imagine?
had, yeah,
Could you
I could, but he had no intention of doing that though, and I know that because when I interviewed Jesse Ventura said he approached Bernie Sanders at the beginning of his 2016 campaign, and he said, "Bernie, if you lose to Hillary Clinton, will you partner with me and start a third party movement?" And Jesse Ventura said Bernie Sanders told him, "No, I will be supporting Hillary Clinton."
Yes, I understand that. There is a second issue there, which is Bernie, as you recall, in 2016, he was blamed originally for Hillary's loss. Then they dropped that idea and they started to go after the Russians. But initially, it was supposedly Bernie's fault, although Bernie said from the moment of Hillary won, I went out and campaigned for her nonstop. He was still blamed. When it came to 2020, Bernie did not want to be blamed and have to carry the albatross his whole life of having gotten Trump elected again. So the moment he dropped out, he decided, I'm going whole hog for Biden. Yes, he did believe, as did many people, and many people do believe, that Trump represents a significant, we can call it national security threat. He did believe that. But I think there's the additional factor that he didn't want to have to bear the albatross if he didn't go all out for Biden of having carried Trump into power. Now, once Biden was elected, and that concern of Trump was set aside, he did have a choice. He could have tried to activate that same base and said, it's time for civil disobedience. It's time for mass demonstrations. It's time for occupying your Democratic and Republican Party offices, which was the civil rights movement and which was the New Deal. And he did not do that. Now, why he didn't do that, I think there's grounds for speculating on different things. My only point is he himself acknowledged that he couldn't get his platform through without those demonstrations. And then he abandoned that whole idea. He chose Biden's ear. So by his own reckoning, it had to end in failure, which it did. It
But
ended
then how do you, what do you say to all the working class people that gave like their last $15 to Bernie Sanders when they really didn't have it to give? It's just, these are the things that I saw happening on the ground. Like people that really did not, I don't really have the money to give to Bernie Sanders, but I believe he's going to fight for Medicare for all. I saw those things happen. I saw people give their last to Bernie Sanders. So my thing is, I think you don't travel across the country and tell people that you're starting a political revolution. That's not a revolution when you just walk away. And I think that's where a lot of the disappointment, comes from. But in reference to like the mass movements, like where do you
say that? You're totally right. He was a disappointment. But as part of the historical reckoning, we have to look at all sides. That is to say, what went right and what went wrong. And what you just described, one has to honestly acknowledge that went wrong. It was a disaster. His abandonment of the revolution and just having reduced the whole process to his campaign. I totally agree with that. But I'm not going to, having acknowledged that, deny the historical significance of that campaign. What that campaign did was it brought to the surface tendencies that were at work in our society beginning in the early 1980s And he brought to the surface the prospect and the possibility of building a class-based coalition which can democratically win and take power. That's his historical significance. And then we have to say it's going to take a new generation. Hopefully they'll find the time before it's too late. And it will require, again, to educate and to organize. Otherwise, it's completely hopeless. All of these discussions about what the squad did do, what the squad didn't do, in my view, or does do and has not done, in my view, it's completely irrelevant because it has nothing to do with radical politics. You should be using your prominence, using your office to educate and also to organize, to tell people, if you want to get this thing through, let's start building an organization. Let's set a target date for when we're going to do X, Y, and Z. That's radical politics. It's about mobilizing people against power. How much can you really achieve on your own in the halls of Congress? On your own? That's just silly. It has nothing to do with the radical politics. So I'm glad that there are more progressive people there than less progressive people. Sure, they can get one thing through or some things through, but that just makes them, in the old language, that just makes them good liberals. Okay, I'm glad we have a few liberals in Congress. Fine, okay. But is that radical politics? And then we have to take the other side. The other side is, on many serious issues, the so-called Squad Plus are seriously miseducating people. It's not just that they haven't taken advantage of their position to educate. They're seriously miseducating. The fact that they have not used their platform in order to enlighten people about the reckless, warlike posture of this administration, which is leading us still possibly in Ukraine, and almost certainly, if we go to war with China, in China, leading to our total annihilation as a species. The fact that they are not, it's not even that they are not denouncing the Biden administration, it's that they refuse to even hold hearings, congressional hearings, at least to hear the other side. Because there are people, mainstream people, of real respectability. You know, people like Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer, very respectable mainstream people who are highly critical of what the Biden administration is doing and telling us this may lead to Armageddon. Now, you don't even have to take a side. You don't have to take a side. Maybe the Squad Plus really believe in what Biden is doing, but you can hold a hearing to listen to the other side, not even a hearing. That's serious miseducation. It's not just delinquency, it's miseducation. Because where we're now headed is very dangerous territory. Very dangerous. Still very dangerous in Ukraine. Because we have given tens of billions of dollars to a regime with barely any oversight as to where these weapons are ending up.
Yep.
Now, the best scenario, and I know it's going to sound ironic, but the best scenario is the weapons are being sold on the black market, which is, of course, happening with no oversight. What the soldiers do, they take their top-notch, cutting-edge weapons and they go and sell it and get good money for it. But that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is there are a lot of crazy people in the Ukraine. Okay, maybe it's only 20%. The estimates are the Nazi-oriented folks in the Ukraine, they're between 10 and 20% of the population, okay? So Ukraine has a population of, 60 million or 80 million? I can't remember right now. But the point is, those 20% will now have in their possession the most sophisticated, precision, state-of-the-art weaponry in the world. And they're crazy. They're lunatics. They're right-wing Nazi lunatics. Now, you might smile, but you won't be smiling when I say, everybody says, what will Putin do if it looks like Russia is losing the war? Will he resort to nuclear weapons? I think the much bigger danger is, what will those crazies do if it looks like Ukraine is losing the war? Will it be Samson and the temple? We're going to take down everybody with us? Are they going to target a nuclear reactor in Russia? Those are very real possibilities. You have to be blinder than King Lear not to see what you have done. You have created all the elements of a nightmare scenario, of a Armageddon. There is every reason to believe that if these folks think they're going to lose, they're going to take everyone and everything with them. That's a very serious possibility. I've talked to some top people, or communicated with some top people on this issue. I was very surprised that they said it never occurred to them. And then I mentioned in the last email exchange with correspondence with somebody, I said, I think there's, we already saw, in my opinion, I can't prove it. I do not believe the US was behind the drone attack on the presidential palace. I do not believe the Zelensky government was behind it. I think a rogue battalion, an Azov battalion, which are now equipped with those super space age weapons, I think they targeted Putin's residence. And had they succeeded, that would have, as the expression has it, all bets are off. But that didn't happen. But I do believe there's a serious possibility that they might target a nuclear reactor. And then again, all bets are off. And this was created totally by the Biden administration with the complicity, which they have to accept the culpability for, with the complicity of the so-called squad, Bernie Sanders, and a hell of a lot of others who, in Bernie's words, said on the question of Ukraine, I trust Biden. Yeah. I trust Biden. You trust Biden? No, Bernie. Something's seriously wrong when you say something like that. Can you show me anything in Biden's foreign policy portfolio that gives you grounds for trusting him? Anything. I'm curious. I'd like to see the war in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. We're off. Hello?
You're here.
Yeah.
No, I think it's just, I think a big part of it is, there is that conflict of interest that is his friend. That could be part of it. But when we talk about like building movements again in this country, when I look at what's happening in France and I see millions of people out in the street protesting, they've been doing this for weeks now against Macron's pension reform. How do we get to that level in the United States over the class issues? So there's no campaign attached to it this time, but we're focusing on the class issues. So one of the things that Eric came up with is 11 demands. So 11 demands for real democracy: fix big money in politics and government, healthcare for all, a minimum standard for living for everyone, end the wars, reject censorship, criminal justice reform, respond to the climate emergency, immigration reform, an election system we can trust, revamp taxation and funding, and democratize the enterprise. What if we were to build a movement? That's what I know Eric is trying to do, to build a movement around 11 demands with no campaign attached to it. How do we get those millions of people out in the street like they do in France?
Well, I don't want to get into the sort of the nitty gritty. What I would say is the program that you just presented is a kind of political party platform. But there's something altogether different, which is a series of demands which are going to mobilize the public. And the two are not the same. I'm going to take an example which you're going to think is so obsolete as to age me even more than I'm aged. When the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia, they didn't come to power on a slogan of implement communism, eliminate wages, or things like that. Their slogan was very concrete. It was called bread, peace, and land. Bread for the starving workers, peace for the soldiers, and land for the peasants. That's how you reach people: bread, peace, and land. And then that's their platform. And then their essential political platform was called all power to the Soviets. At that point in time, there was a dual system of government. There was a formal government, and then there was what was called organs of workers' power, the Soviets. And so it was all power to the Soviets. And I think one of the things that Bernie did very effectively was a kind of trial and error. He was honing his platform, that, so to speak, bread, peace, and land platform. He was honing it, testing different slogans to see which would resonate with a broad public. And of course, the one that resonated the most was Medicare for all. That was a winner. But you know what? Coming up with slogans is not easy. It's not easy. You could go back to the civil rights movement. There were real debates about whether or not we should aim for desegregation. Should we aim for voter rights? There was all sorts of contending positions on what we should focus on, what should be our demand. And coming up with the right demands is not easy. I could tell you what I think, if you're interested, I could tell you what I think were the wrong demands. I thought defund the police was a bad demand. It was a bad demand because everybody said, well, this is what we mean by defund the police. We mean giving money for community organizations and so on and so forth. The problem is, if you have to explain a slogan, then it's a bad slogan. The whole point of a slogan is crystal clarity about what you mean. So we had a slogan, defund the police. Well, to a lot of people, that meant that if you pick up your phone and then dial 911, you're just going to get no sound. That didn't sound like a great idea to a lot of people. I'm all for creating a communist society where we get rid of police. But for now, I am very grateful that when I dial 911, somebody picks up the phone. Okay? So defund the police was a terrible slogan. And it was not surprising because it's in the nature of politics that when you have a vacuum, a political vacuum, the most extreme slogans always take over because there's no accountability. When you have an organization and you have a leadership, the leadership and the organization have to produce results. If they don't produce results, they're over. People want to see results. But when you don't have a leadership and an organization, then the most radical or flashy demand always wins out because there's no responsibility. So when you, at that time during the George Floyd demonstrations, people who had real organizations in the African American community, let's say my friend from graduate school days, Lawrence Hem, he heads up an organization in Newark called People Organized for Progress, POP. And he's been at it fighting police brutality for the last half century, believe it or not. Ever since he left graduate school, he went right back to his home base, which was Newark, and he fought police brutality. What was his demand? His demand was that we have to hold police to the same legal standard as everybody else. You know, the 48-hour rule and this and that. He had a very concrete demand. Eliminate the super something, but the super legal status. Eliminate the super legal status of cops. That was a very concrete, focused demand, which was winnable. It was winnable. The problem is when you come up with demands which sound radical, but they are unwinnable, and all they breed is despair. I'm not trying to boast, but I'm speaking factually. I was in the George Floyd demonstrations every day for 6 weeks. That's roughly how long they lasted, every day for 6 weeks. And by the end, as you recall, they completely fizzled out because it resulted in attacking statues and attacking murals, which was completely crazy because what are you going to do? Is a white person going to pull down a statue of Ulysses S. Grant and kick it and stomp on it and say, take that, you racist this or racist that? It was completely meaningless and pointless. So of course they were going to die or die out and also breed a lot of cynicism after all the corruption came, surfaced regarding the so-called leaders of Black Lives Matter. And a second awful demand, awful beyond words, is the Angela Davis Roadshow, the prison abolitionism. Because is prison abolitionism on the historical agenda now? Is that on the agenda? That's why wherever Angela goes now, and believe me, I say this with pain and anguish. Angela Davis was a heroine of my youth. I held her in the highest regard. But what she's turned into is simply laughable. Where all these white liberals go to hear her lecture on prison abolitionism, and they all nod their head as Angela and Gina Dent, speak very seriously about this. Of course, because it has no connection with reality. And you get to be with Angela, and you get to talk about, prison abolitionism, which has nothing to do with anything. Prison abolitionism is, if you read Lenin, Lenin's State and Revolution, yes, you eliminate all the repressive forces of society, he said, all the special apparatuses of repression, of which prisons are one. The special apparatuses of repression, he said, that doesn't come until, and I'm quoting him now, the highest stage of communism. Okay? We're going to eliminate all the special forces of repression. Now I ask you, Sabrina and Angela, if you're listening, are we anywhere near the highest stage of communism? Are we near that? Then what are you talking about? This has nothing to do with anything. It's just a hot ticket item on Martha's Vineyard. Or when no, it's true. And then she goes around to all of these Ivy League universities where people like Amy Gutman, who I knew, this milquetoast liberal who taught at Princeton, and then she was the president of U of P. Now she's the American ambassador to Germany. Amy Gutman, this milquetoast liberal is literally, she is in a state of nirvana, euphoria, introducing Angela Davis, who's going to speak on prison abolitionism. Now, I really have to ask myself, Sabrina, and I'm dead serious about this. If I were being introduced by, say, George Soros, I really would have some questions about what is it I'm saying that George Soros likes so much? Okay, George Soros and I were both Jewish, but guess what? That's where it begins and that's where it ends. Otherwise, we have nothing in common. So I have to ask myself, why isn't Angela Davis asking herself, why am I getting all these hysterical warm receptions from all of these filthy rich crooks? Why am I getting? I told you the story. You'll forgive me if I'm repeating myself. If you go to YouTube and you can put it up yourself. Angela spoke at the University of South Carolina. And she's introduced by this Southern belle with this huge shock of blonde hair. And she happens to be the second richest billionaire in South Carolina. The second richest billionaire in South Carolina. And she introduces Angela only half jokingly. She introduces Angela by saying, Angela and I have a lot in common. Angela and I have a lot in common. Okay, you don't have to be a purist. Fine. And we have to make alliances. Fine. But Angela, don't you pause to think why the second richest billionaire in South Carolina is introducing you?
Yeah.
And don't you stop to think when she says we have a lot in common? I mean, I think if I were the one being introduced, I'd begin by saying, excuse me, Southern Belle, but I really don't think we have all that much in common because I want to get rid of people like you. Yeah. I think you're just a band of parasites who not the least are causing a whole lot of misery for Black people in South Carolina. But she doesn't do that. She doesn't do it at all. Maybe it's because she's at the end of her life, or maybe she's intoxicated with the power. I don't know. But I know one thing for certain. These slogans like prison abolitionism, they have nothing whatsoever to do with radical politics. And they simply are ways for very wealthy white liberals to show how cutting edge and radical they are without having to make any sacrifices whatsoever. It's a wonderful case of you get your cake and you get to eat it.
Well, I get that side of it. It's interesting. I wasn't going to bring up defund the police, but since you went there, there is actually a road to police abolition. It's called 10 Demands for Justice. And these are steps that this was created by working class people who are activists. My comrade Nick from RBN actually was one of the co-creators for 10 Demands for Justice. But it's interesting when people tell me that they didn't understand defund the police, because I totally understood what that meant. And the same people that tell me they didn't understand defund the police they understand defund education. So it's just it to me, I felt like people took it to a place where it really didn't need to go. The reason why the slogan was defund the police is so that it could not be co-opted. And I think that was very important. But 10 demands for justice, Norm, you should look this up. I think it's important to see there are the 10 demands that tell you the road to abolition. So I think this is important for people to see. Defund the police and reallocate resources to impacted communities. 2 is demilitarize the police. 3 is eliminate discriminatory policing, prosecution, and sentencing. 4 is institute complete law enforcement transparency and accountability. 5 is independently investigate all police crimes and abuses of power. 6 is instill community representation, oversight, and safety measures. 7 is in strategic counter protest violence, which that would go along with the George Floyd protest as well. 8 is apologize and provide reparations. 9 is in the war on drugs. And 10, which is the prison abolition, which you were referring to, that is the last demand, which is in carceral punishment. So if you click on each of these, you get like a breakdown of each one, but there is a pathway to it. But I get what you're saying. It's not you can't go from 0 to 10 like immediately, but that is the road to abolition.
I happen to be a little bit old-fashioned, and without sounding dogmatic and without sounding rigid, I don't think there's a way to eliminate the special apparatuses of repression in any society until you've eliminated classes. And the prospect of eliminating classes, because any class is going to, whenever there is a society divided by classes, they create instruments of repression, so the haves get to keep what they have and to make sure the have-nots stay have-nots. That to me is a fairly simple, transparent, and easily comprehensible proposition. So I don't believe that there's any possibility of literally, if we're talking literally, abolishing prisons until we have a classless society. I think that's not on the drawing board. On the other hand, what you just listed to me was exactly what Bernie did. Those were concrete demands, and then you have to focus on one or two which you think are realizable, because it's politics. Politics is, there are a group of people who are, as it were, martyrs for the cause. You know what? They will keep fighting, come what may, win or lose. They don't care. This is their calling in life. But as you know, most people are not martyrs to the cause. Most people have a life to live, and they have a family, they have a job, but at certain moments in history, they're willing to give themselves for the cause, okay? However, there are just so many times people will go out for a cause if you don't win anything. You've got to show concrete results, because when people see concrete results, what do they think? Hey, we have more power than we thought we had. We actually were able to wrest this victory from the powers that be. But there's only, as I said, a handful of people who will keep going out with no results. So you have to pick, that slogan. As I said, it's not easy to figure out the slogan. You have to pick the right slogans which can produce results, which may seem like small change or may seem reformist, but which do the most important thing. The most important thing is to demonstrate to the people that if you organize, if you give of yourself, you can win. You can win small things at the beginning, but that's why the ruling elites are so determined not to give an inch, because they're terrified. If you give an inch, people will get into their heads, hey, if we struggle hard enough, we can even get the mile. So don't give an inch. And it's the job of a good political leader, a good organizer, or leaders and organizers. It's their job to get a feel of the lay of the land. what's a realistic objective, which, if we invest enough of ourselves, if we're organized enough, we can win it, you know? But you got to win something. Otherwise, people despair. I don't think it's likely. Personally, we can disagree. As you know, since George Floyd, there have been a number of horrific police killings. They hardly drew a crowd anymore.
Yep.
And the reason, in my opinion, is because he didn't win anything with the George Floyd. And then people, they give up. Either they become cynical, like they say, well, all those people, they took the $90 million, you know, that were given to the BLM World Network, and they bought real estate, so it all seemed like a scam. Or people fell in exactly what you said earlier, Sabrina, the same despair and cynicism after the Bernie Sanders debacle, that nothing came of it. It's the same thing with the George Floyd. That is, successive defeats. In the case of George Floyd, it was the lethal combination of defeat and corruption. At least Bernie wasn't accused of corruption, like he was taking money. No, it was a defeat, but it wasn't corruption. In the case of the George Floyd demonstrations, it was that lethal combination of defeat and corruption, which produced or yielded, as it inevitably does, it yielded despair and cynicism. And it's very hard to get past that. Very hard. I mean, I'm an old timer, as you know. So I feel I can speak with some authority. I know what happens. You know, some people say, oh, you make such a big deal about the money and the corruption. I said, well, frankly, yeah, I do think it's important on a personal level that you have leaders who believe in the cause and aren't corrupt. But that's a personal reaction. There's also the political reaction. It just breeds cynicism among people. It's like you can't trust anyone. You can't even trust these people. The moment they got the money, you know, one of them, Tamika Mallory, she's doing Cadillac commercials. Another one buys 4 homes. You know, it was, what kind of reaction? What do you think? Working people are stupid? That they're going to, as you said, give their last dollar to people? And then find out they're going a real estate buying spree? You don't think that's going to breed cynicism? No. On the personal political level, it's a complete catastrophe, and we have to be upfront about it. I had a young friend, you know, correspondence at Harvard, and he wanted to have a Black Palestinian solidarity event. And for the Black component of the event, he invited Angela Davis. And her representatives got back to him and said $35,000. $35,000. And he wrote to me, thanks for the solidarity. What do you think that breeds to people? What kind of feelings that breeds? So we need, first of all, we need a truthful reckoning. As I said, it's not a totally negative picture. I thought there were very positive things with the Bernie Sanders campaign. I thought the young people were deeply, deeply, deeply inspiring. This was the masses, you know. These were ordinary people, young people, who keep down 2 and 3 jobs. And they were piling into buses, going cross state, you know, to knock on doors for the Bernie campaign. It was deeply inspiring. They were much more, I'm going to tell you honestly, candidly, they were much more inspiring than my generation. Because my generation, there was always the element of flakiness. because of the influence of the counterculture. There are positive things in the counterculture also, but it also made the politics seem a little bit flaky. So you're going from Washington, a demonstration in Washington. It's a serious thing. People are being killed. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible war, the war in Vietnam. Between the estimates are 2 and 3 million Vietnamese were killed. That's a large number. And then 1 million Cambodians and 1 million Laotians. It was a horror. And was all happening before our eyes. So we pile on the bus, we go to Washington. But then on the way back in the bus, everybody's passing around joints. And it diminished the moral gravity of the moment, in my opinion. That wasn't at all true during the Bernie campaign. I was on the buses with the young people. I was deeply impressed by their focus, by their seriousness, and you didn't have like the sexual charge which you had in the 60s. As you know, about my impression from the demonstrations I attended and also the bus rides, it was about 60% women, which was kind of funny when you recall Bernie was accused of Bernie bros, like this was all a male thing. We just went out. Hello?
You're here. You just got to turn the light back on. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Is that your side or my side?
That's your side.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it was a deeply serious undertaking. There were many things to be proud of that generation and also hopeful about many things. However, we need a reckoning. You know, the first job, as Rosa Luxembourg said, of any movement is ruthless self-criticism. We shouldn't be waiting for the Republicans to be saying what I'm saying, that there was an awful lot of corruption, and there's an awful lot of corruption now. We should be open about it. What are these speaking fees? And what is Ibram X. Kendi getting for the $10 million? What is he giving for that $10 million that Dorsey gave him to open up his so-called anti-racist center? Who's giving this money? Why are you taking the money? How is the money being used? We need to have an honest reckoning about those things. Otherwise, we're never going to get to square one, because every radical movement is based on, there's an element of faith. Now, I know that sounds like a religious movement, but no, I don't agree with that. Because at some level, everybody can participate in every decision. And so there are going to be made decisions during negotiations behind behind doors, where you have to believe in your leader. You have to believe that your leader is not going to sell you out. You have to have faith in them. You can't just, you're not going to be able to participate at every single point in every single decision. So there is an element of faith in politics. You believed that the quality that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King shared, there were many things they disagreed on, but the one quality, aside from, okay, I'll say two qualities combined in one. One, they were sincerely committed to the plight of their people. They were sincerely committed to it. And number two, you could trust them. They won't sell you out. Those were the two, which is really one. When you think hard enough about it, it's really one. That's the quality that made them great leaders, great in the sense that they could bring out large numbers of people because people believed in them. They knew it was sincere. When I hear people, $50,000 speaking fees, $10 million, buying 4 homes in 1 year, I have to ask myself, are they deeply concerned about the plight of their people, or are they deeply concerned about their plight? You know? So it's both a moral judgment and a political judgment at the same time. This is not just, as it were, personal moralism. There's a significant political factor. Every great leader in the history of the socialist leftist movement, every great leader, you can say they had one thing in common. They were utterly incorruptible.
Yeah.
Utterly incorruptible. You can go back from Marx, who lived in poverty most of his life. He famously said, because he could have gotten a university position or something like that, and he famously said at one point, "Come hail or high water, I won't let the bourgeoisie turn me into a money-making machine." And when you read all the, one of the interesting things when you read about the history of the socialist movement in Europe or the United States, one of the things that struck me, because I'm recently rereading it, there were never any, I know it's going to sound strange to you, there were vicious, vehement, virulent disagreements about how to proceed at this point and that point. But there was one thing I noticed never came up. You know what never came up? Personal corruption. Lenin could loathe a Kautsky. Luxembourg can loathe this character, that character, and they speak with such passion, such loathing, such anger, they're infuriated, but they never say things like they did it for the money, or they were bribed, or they were crooks. It doesn't come up, and it's a very sad commentary on the present state of the left, so-called left, that it constantly comes up. The only person that didn't come up with, except when that issue surfaced, and we could disagree about it or agree about it, because I don't know your opinion, the issue of how many homes Bernie Sanders owned. Aside from that one issue, I think you will agree with me, the issue of personal corruption never arose. And that was, again, one of the things that made him a believable, credible candidate for masses of people. You may not like it. I happen personally to agree with it. I think personal corruption is, on a personal and on a political level, it's a failing. It's a failing. Nobody ever charged Martin Luther King with trying to make a buck out of his struggle, or Malcolm X. You could say about his wife and his kids after he died, yes, they were trying to make a lot of bucks, but not him. And I don't think that's an accident. I don't think it's possible to build a real movement based on people who are, they may have the right politics, but they're personally corrupt. Now, it happens that Al Sharpton has the wrong politics and he's personally corrupt. But even if he had the right politics, he's such a crook, he would, who's going to turn out for him? It was very revealing, by the way, Sabrina, that when Joe Biden produced the first video for the new campaign cycle, he included 2 African Americans. He included Ketanji Brown Jackson and Al Sharpton. That tells you, with Al Sharpton, what the Democratic Party thinks is a black leader. Al Sharpton. It was a very telling fact that the Obama administration and his inner circle, Valerie Jarrett, David Axelrod, they found a place for Reverend Al, but they found no place for Cornel West. It tells you a lot. Mm-hmm. Like Cornel, not like Cornel, he is certainly the most intellectually accomplished African American in our society today. In my opinion, had he taken a different direction in life, and that's his choice, but had he taken a different direction in life, he could quite probably have been the successor to W.E.B. Du Bois. He took another path, and that's, as I say, his choice. But it did strike me. I read, when I was writing my last book, I read through all the memoirs of Obama's inner circle. And it was very telling to me that Axelrod, Valerie Jarrett, they all sang the praises of Al Sharpton. That to me said it all.
All right, Norm, I have one more question for you. I do want to make sure I get this one in because this was important about Israel and Palestine. We talked to the Palestinian network about what would be the appropriate solution. That this was like about a year or two ago. And when we mentioned to them the idea of a two-state solution, they made it very clear to us that that would not be an acceptable solution for the Palestinian people. When you think about that and you think about the Palestinian-led movement, BDS, and you also have to factor in what some of the Ethiopian Jews that are also there in Israel, what they're going through right now, what do you feel is the appropriate solution in reference to the conflict between Israel and Palestine?
I don't believe now is the time to be talking about solutions. I spoke to you at some length this evening about how corruption and a failure to produce results breeds cynicism and despair about politics. Well, I devoted the whole of my adult life to the Israel-Palestine conflict and trying to achieve justice for the Palestinians, at least to make a contribution towards that goal or objective. At this point in time, because of the deep corruption of the Palestinian Authority, because all the hopes raised, beginning with the first Intifada, the first Palestinian revolt against the Israeli occupation in 1988, and then the hopes raised by what was called the Oslo Accord in 1993, and the fact that from all of their hopes, all that they yielded was an indescribably corrupt Palestinian Authority who now does the dirty work of torturing and repressing the Palestinians. It's unsurprising for all the reasons I went through a few moments ago, and which informed what I said a few moments ago, that the Palestinians have at this point overwhelmingly given up on politics. The attitude is every man for himself. Now, occasionally there are outbursts of violence, and one can support or not support the outbursts of violence. But as you know, there's a world of difference between periodic outbursts of violence and organization and the capacity to go the long haul in order to achieve a goal. Until that organization, and to repeat myself to the point of tedium, but as I say, it's a lifetime's experience, until you get that incorruptible leadership and you get that organization, I don't think anything can happen. So I don't believe now is the time to be talking about solutions any more than, as I said earlier, I think now in the American context should be talking about prison abolitionism. A solution is so far off now. At this moment in time, Israel can literally do anything it wants, and it won't even be a blip on the radar screen. There have been many crimes committed by Israel just the past month, which resemble almost identically crimes that Israel committed in 2002. Okay, we're talking about 2 decades ago. In 2002, those crimes evoked international outrage. Now they pass without even a murmur on the international stage. If you want to retch, if you are in the mood to purge your system by retching, you can watch the European Commission head, Ursula von der Leyen. She delivered this birthday message to Israel because Israel celebrated its founding on May 14th. And it's a videotape. And she talks about how Israel is a vibrant democracy and how it literally made the desert bloom. I mean, the oldest, most tired cliches, which they couldn't have said 20 years ago, because there was a Palestinian movement which would have at least put some constraints and some limits. Not a lot, but some. But now that the movement has collapsed, the resistance has collapsed, they could say whatever they want. It's back to square one. So I don't believe now is the right time to be talking about solutions. It's, to me, as I said, meaningless as talking about prison abolitionism. We have to focus on slogans which are realizable, can produce results, so that people will believe they have the power to effect real change and hopefully at some point radical change.
All right, Norm. Well, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Well, thank you. You were a wonderful interlocutor. You know, at the beginning, there was a certain fear of hostility because, not today, but I mean, when we first met, because sometimes people, I think, make assumptions about me. First of all, because I'm white, old, Jewish, and academic, and that's a kind of lethal combination in itself for young people who are, you know, are not in my time frame. I remember, if you allow me, I'll end it on this note. So I mentioned to you my friend Lawrence Ham, who heads up People Organized for Progress in Newark. And he had a very robust grassroots organization, the real people. I mean, the people of Newark, the real people of Newark. And I once said to him, we called him back then, his name back then was Adimu Chunga. That was the name given to him by Amiri Baraka, who was kind of a father figure in Larry's life. And I said, let's bring over Paul Sweezy. Now, Paul Sweezy was, I told you, the most eminent American Marxist economist. And he had white hair like myself, but unlike myself, he came from a ruling class family. His father was the vice president of First National City Bank, the precursor of Citibank. And he went to Harvard as an undergraduate, Harvard as a graduate. He was an eminent economist until he became a Marxist economist. He changed during the Great Depression. So Larry had to introduce Paul Sweezy, and he introduced him by saying, I'll never forget it, we're talking about 40 years ago. He introduced him by saying, don't let his white hair fool you. He's a real radical. And that's how I feel about myself. I haven't changed my sentiments at all. I am the same person. When Paul Robeson was celebrating his 75th birthday, it was at Carnegie Hall, but he couldn't show up. He was in seclusion. But there was a phone call from him, a phone message from him, and it was broadcast at the event. And he began by saying, I'm the same old Paul. I'll never forget that. I'm the same old Paul. And I'm the same old Norm. I'm the person I was when I was 16 or maybe 15. Of course, I had to learn from life. As Muhammad Ali famously said, if you think the same thing at 40 that you thought at 20, then you've wasted 20 years in your life. And of course, there's truth to that. Life experience should uh, deepen your understanding of life, or in this case, politics. But I'm fundamentally the same person, and I can come across as abrasive, acerbic, uh, cantankerous, pugnacious. But that's only because these things mean as much to me now as when I was 16 years old. I don't use the clenched fist anymore. Um, and I certainly feel there are many venues where I can play uh, a role of providing some wisdom, life based on my study and my experience, but where I don't belong. Where I don't belong. This is your world. You have to change it. Prospects are very grim, but you never know if they're hopeless or not. But it's your world, and so I don't go to a lot of venues uh, because I don't think I belong there. But my opinions have fundamentally not changed, and they're not going to change. I'm going to my grave with them.
All right, Norm, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, and best of luck to you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and dive in. I have two news stories I do want to cover that are very important, at least I think so. I'm going to hit the comments first. We'll show the thumbnail, shout out patrons, and we'll dive right in. Shout out to Matt McGahee. Thank you so much for becoming a Sabby member. Whoop, whoop to Matt. And thank you for the super chat, Dave. Is there an Asian pivot reminiscent of Mackinder's pivot of history? Is that how the neoliberals are thinking? That's a good question. I am not sure. And thank you for the super sticker, Solomon Mendez. Let's go ahead and get those comments on Rockfin, Eric, and then we'll move on along. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Jim. $5 for some truth telling. Just give me the truth. Just give me some truth. Thank you for the tip. Also, Hemp Car. Thick Knot Han offers us a way out of the nightmare. Reverend and Dr. King Jr., Not Han, was working in truth and reconciliation most of his life. He brought Palestinians and Israelis together to talk about their fears. He suggests they air it on TV. Thank you so much for that. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the thumbnail here so we can go ahead and dive in. Tonight, we are discussing, of course, Norm Finkelstein was just here. We are also going to discuss Hunter Biden shock. You need to hear what's happening with Hunter Biden now. And of course, this one is a big one. RFK Jr. and Joe Biden debate demand. There is something new happening around that and just those two. And I'm going to get into that issue as well. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. Go ahead and share you guys here. Shout out to the patrons. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, Sabbies, and of course, members as well. Thank you guys so much. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a special shout out to a new Sabby patron. Let's give it up for Lee Baker. Whoop, whoop. Whoop, whoop. All right. We're going to go ahead and dive into our first story. Now, this one is about Hunter Biden. We did discuss a couple of weeks ago that Hunter Biden's finance dealings, along with Joe Biden, the Biden family, basically all together, are under investigation. They're looking into their finance dealings. Well, there's something else that has been brought up that I want to discuss as well, because I feel that all of this is connected. Now, this is this issue here with Hunter Biden and human trafficking. You guys need to hear this. Listen to this clip.
One thing that we don't talk enough about, I know President Biden's just so proud of his son, but we have the evidence that Hunter Biden paid tens of thousands of dollars for prostitutes that were sex trafficked through an international sex trafficking ring.
Oh.
I mean,
this goes along with some of the finance issues that they were discussing about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. It's not just about the business dealings with possibly Ukraine. It's not just about this laptop. This goes deeper than I think a lot of people know. Now, I told you a couple of days ago, more names were going to start to come out. I really do believe this year, 2023, is going to be the year of corruption being revealed. We've already seen a couple of names come out in reference to Jeffrey Epstein. We're continuing to follow that. And now we're hearing about corruption in reference to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, both of them. This is huge. They are connected to enormous amounts of wealth, even just because, Biden is president and was a senator, they have certain connections. Now, this is kind of like karma in a sense, because when the Democratic Party decided to come after Donald Trump for his business dealings, it was only natural that the GOP was going to come after Hunter Biden and Joe Biden for their financial business dealings as well. So this is karma at the highest degree.
I mean, yes, ick. And President Biden, during about a 4 or 5 month period, offered to pay for about $100,000 of Hunter Biden's bills when he was spending tens of thousands of dollars on these women who are sex trafficked. Now, if that is at a minimum morally reprehensible and wrong, and the president's defending that, and the media isn't even looking into it.
Wouldn't that be a felony? I mean, if you're doing business with a sex trafficking ring, that's more than ethically offensive.
It is grotesque, but the media doesn't concentrate on it. We had that in our report. We had the business, the financial transactions proving it. James Comer does the same thing. But again, it is so icky. It's so reprehensible.
It is.
People don't want to talk about it, but it's just galling to hear the president talk about how proud he is of Hunter. And he enables this. He enables it by propping up his son, both in terms of those types of words as well as financially. It's really pretty sick.
You know the irony, too, in what you've just shared? So the president's son, just in the last few days, wanted to fight his child support because the family doesn't want to recognize that child as legitimate. The irony would be is what if that child, I mean, you said prostitutes paid for by Hunter Biden, that going through a sex trafficking ring. I mean, so how does the family not know about that if they're denying a baby that potentially came from that very source? I mean,
because the family does know about it. I don't believe that the Biden family did not know about this. I believe at least Joe Biden did. And I wouldn't be surprised if others didn't know as well. They did know about it. You just don't. This is not something you sweep under the rug. I really do believe, aside from Joe Biden, I believe there are other members of the Biden family that have done everything that they could to try to protect Hunter Biden. Everything that they could. When we talk about calling out corruption, that means from all political parties, not just the opposing political party, right? You have to call all of it out. And this is a problem. And this is exactly why Twitter censored that post from the New York Times, or New York Post, excuse me, that article from the New York Post about the Hunter Biden laptop story. This is exactly why government agencies came in and told them to take the article down. They did not want this information to get out. A lot of people are not talking about this story. How many of you in the chat heard about this before I told you tonight? A lot of people not talking about. A lot of people not talking about Jeffrey Epstein and Noam Chomsky. You can't just dismiss it because it's someone who's a member of your party or someone that you like.
no, we don't know what we don't know. But that was quite the bombshell you just dropped. And you're right, people aren't reading deep enough, and when they do, they don't report it. We will too. We will definitely do that. It is ick factor 10, as you put it, very icky, but those are the facts.
So there's more, because I don't want to just leave it at that part. This is all connected. Now, here's another clip I wanted to show you. Now, this is where the House Oversight Republicans, they were holding a press briefing about the investigation into the Biden family. You need to hear this as well. Now, Byron Donald, it seems like he is the one that is leading this. And again, I have to be very clear. Just because you dislike Donald Trump doesn't mean you ignore corruption that's coming from Joe Biden and his family. Period. Let's go ahead and get into this. Just going to fast forward a little bit.
This includes two individuals the committee is particularly concerned about. One of them, Xi Jinping, had close ties to the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party and operated a...
They kill me how they always refer to it as that, the Chinese Communist Party. But here we go.
...to the Biden family. Many of the wire payments occurred while Joe Biden was vice president and leading the United States efforts in these countries. First instance, while Vice President Biden was lecturing Romania on anti-corruption policies, in reality, he was a walking billboard for his son and family to collect money. Hunter Biden and his associates capitalized on a lucrative financial relationship with the Romanian national who was under investigation for and later convicted of corruption in Romania. The Bidens received over $1 million for the deal. And 16 of the 17 payments to their associates' account that funneled the Bidens' money occurred while Joe Biden was vice president.
By the way, these weren't actual businesses that existed. So they basically were funneling money into fake businesses that did not exist, sort of like a shell, so to speak. This is huge. You don't come forward with this unless you have documentation and you have evidence.
In fact, the money stops flowing from the Romanian national soon after Joe Biden leaves the vice presidency. This is a pattern of influence peddling. This appears separate from any payment Hunter received from his work connecting this individual to a U.S. law firm. We'll also provide further information regarding the Bidens' relationship with China. This includes two individuals the committee is particularly concerned about. One of them, Xi Jinping, had close ties to the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party and operated a multi-billion-dollar energy company with access to large sums of money. We'll discuss how the Bidens received millions of dollars from this individual through the use of shell companies and wire transfers.
Millions of dollars. So they're shell companies, guys. They're not even real. It doesn't even exist.
In March, the committee released its first bank records memorandum that showed a Biden associate, Rob Walker, used his company to funnel money from the Chinese to various Biden family members. Democrats dismissed the evidence, even though it was based on bank records directly from the bank. The Democrats on the Oversight Committee received the same records as the Republicans, and they were able to verify the information. Democrats said all the bank records showed were Papa John's and Starbucks receipts. They deliberately chose to misconstrue and deny what was clearly in front of them. Hunter Biden's representatives claimed the money was, quote, good faith seed funds, but could not explain why those funds had to go through an intermediary in what appears to be an attempt to hide the transfers from the Chinese. They also couldn't explain why the Bidens received over $1 million in 16 different wire transfers over a period of 3 months to at least 5 different banks.
Honey, I hear you, Ashura. Trump will eat Biden with this. Absolutely. Absolutely. Could you imagine if the debates were held today? This is awful. Millions of dollars this family has received.
The president, when confronted with this information, said it wasn't true. Instead of being honest with the American people, President Biden has claimed since the 2020 election that his family has not received money from China. That was a lie in 2020, and he continues to lie to the American people now. The Bidens have received millions of dollars from China. It is inconceivable that the president did not know it. The White House refuses to correct the president's statements, showing the president is now using the federal government to run interference for his families and his own role in these schemes. Now I want to say a few remarks about the developments last week. A week ago, I sent a subpoena to the FBI for a form that a whistleblower has alleged is in the FBI's possession. We hope the FBI will be transparent and forthcoming and provide the Oversight Committee with the 1023 form we have subpoenaed. If they do, the committee will assess the form it has subpoenaed from the FBI, and has been my practice. We will report to you only facts when they are verified and indisputable. This committee will not pursue witch hunts or string the American people along for years with false promises of evidence that is beyond circumstantial evidence, as Representative Adam Schiff and the Democrats did for years.
That was a clap back in reference to Russiagate there.
I trust the whistleblower. A subpoena from this committee is a powerful tool that I do not take lightly. The level of detail provided to Senator Grassley led me to conclude a subpoena was warranted, and I stand by that assessment. I will say this. When Senator Grassley approached me with the information the whistleblower provided, it was because of the information we've learned through this committee's own investigation that indicated to me the whistleblower's allegations are consistent with our independent findings. Those findings are what I called you here today to discuss. The committee has reviewed thousands of bank records from individuals and companies affiliated with the Bidens and their associates. It has received these bank records pursuant to 4 subpoenas I've issued to different banks. These were targeted and specific subpoenas, and each was different based on the information we believed the banks possessed. Every one of those subpoenas returned valuable information that had been unreported and that contributed to this committee's understanding of how the Bidens conducted their businesses. The committee is concerned by the complicated, suspicious network of over 20 companies we have identified the Bidens and their associates used to enrich themselves. Most of these companies were limited liability companies formed during Joe Biden's vice presidency. The bank records show the Biden family, their associates, and their companies received over $10 million from foreign nationals and their companies.
And we'll go ahead and pause it there. It is a rather, lengthy video, but I think you grasp the gist of it. I think you really understand like where this was going. Eric, for some reason, oh no, I'm not. Okay. But this is a problem. This is a problem. So here's my prediction. Either one or two things is going to happen. They are either going to try to find a way to push Biden out of the way and have someone else swap in that place for 2024. I don't know. I don't know who they would pick, but this is really, really bad. And for this information to come out now before the debates, Trump could use this at his disposal. Right now, Trump is in the lead. He's beaten Joe Biden by 7 points. This situation, listen, what you do in the dark can come to the light. Because this situation with Hunter Biden, they tried their best to bury the story. They tried their best to cover it up. It all goes back to that laptop and what was on that laptop. And the story ended up getting out anyway. This is not good. Looks very bad. Very bad. And there needs to be some type of accountability. And if the Democratic Party wants there to be accountability for Donald Trump and his financial business dealings, then there also needs to be accountability for Joe Biden and his son and all that cruddy shit that they did overseas. So essentially what we have are corrupt politicians. That's it. Controlled by corporate power, obsessed with greed. That's what we have. They're corrupt. And I look forward to seeing more information come out about all of them. It's a hot mess. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Gina. The Oracle says the elite use their means, including and especially connections, to cover their tracks. That's right. That's right. So keep your eye on this story. The fact that Hunter Biden, you mean to tell me you're out here and you're participating in human trafficking? And this guy can just walk freely around wherever he wants to because he's Joe Biden's son. Call it all out. Call it all out. Terrible. Okay, I'm looking at the time here. So I do need to move on to my next story because I have another panel after this tonight with Eric. This is huge news as well. There is a new poll in reference to the Democratic primary, and I think you really need to sit down and take a look at this. Brace yourself. Right now, this is a poll from Rasmussen. If the candidates for the 2024 Democratic presidential nomination were Joe Biden, RFK Jr., and Marianne Williamson, which candidate would you vote for? Everybody hold on to your seats for this one. 36% said Joe Biden. 35% said RFK Jr. 6% Marianne Williamson, 11% some other candidate, 12% not sure. Even the some other candidate isn't higher than RFK Jr.'s percentage here. 35%. This is huge. And if you want to adjust for a margin of error, you could kind of almost say that him and Joe Biden, this technically would be considered a tie. But the Democratic Party doesn't want you to have any debates. I told you, if you keep watching this, RFK Jr. is going to continue to climb in the polls. And then it's going to become very more difficult, I think, for people to make excuses for the Democratic Party choosing not to have primary debates. How can you dispute this? How can you, support them not having debates when you look at these polls? How? There's no way. No way. And on top of that, there was a focus group in Georgia. And it sounds like to me, they really want primary debates. Now, why is that important? Because you have to remember Joe Biden was able to turn Georgia blue. Doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Georgia can easily return back to the red state. So I think everybody needs to hear this. Shout out to Case Study QB. Thank you so much for this clip. Hold on to your seats, buddies.
Georgia swing state voters say they want to see President Biden in a debate, but not with Donald Trump, but with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? What's that about?
It's probably not a headline that Biden or his folks want to see or maybe even care about too much. But the most fascinating thing about these focus groups is that it always shows us exactly how these crucial voters who actually decide elections feel. Not only do they not want to see Trump nor Biden running for office, they said they'd like to see Biden face more Democratic challengers, and they think he should debate RFK Jr. or any other prominent Democrat who might jump in the race to challenge him. And
did you hear that? So voters in Georgia, they want to see primary debates with Joe Biden, and they actually want to encourage more people to run against him. This is what the people actually want. So the Democratic Party, the DMC, right now, they're going against what the people want and what they want to see. But when you actually go out and you talk to the people, you find out what the people actually want, not what the party wants. And this could be a very revealing moment, because if they continue with this and those debates don't happen, I don't know, voters in Georgia can easily change their mind, decide not to support him again. What other reason would they give? You don't want to have debates. This man is polling with you neck and neck now, and you still don't want him to debate. What are they trying to hide? What is it that they don't want you to see about Joe Biden? I think they're trying to keep him in the dark as much as possible. I think they are trying to prevent Joe Biden from having more appearances if he doesn't need to, because they know that he is declining mentally. Let's go on.
That's because, frankly, they say they want whoever represents them to be able to prove their mental acuity, their fitness for office. Some folks said that they want someone who doesn't need to use flashcards or notes or a teleprompter to be able to talk to them and debate someone on a debate stage. Others said, well, if they're both running to represent the same party, then I would be interested to see where there are policy similarities, where there are policy differences. But the big thing is that Biden's age has become a real problem with these more independent-minded voters who once supported Trump in 2016, then went Biden in 2020.
It's not just the independent-minded voters. And they keep saying age because they're trying not to paint this picture of Joe Biden experiencing cognitive decline. That's why they're saying age. It's not about his age. It's about his mental ability right now. And if he is experiencing cognitive decline, which it appears that is the case, it's not just independent voters that can see that. Everybody can see it every time he speaks. So listen to the way that they frame things. I think that's important, you guys. They're trying to make it seem like, well, yeah, the independent voters, it's not just the independent voters that are noticing that Joe Biden is having some difficulty. But they don't want to tell you that Democrats are noticing this too.
And are now looking more to the person than the party. That helps Biden because, yes, while his age might be an issue, these folks detest Trump and they call his character disgusting. They were very unhappy with the verdict from the E. Jean Carroll case, unhappy because of what it says that he has done. And so there's no real scenario in which they say they'll take Donald Trump back. But if they're given an alternative, viable third-party option, all of the folks in this focus group said that they would pick that person over Biden or Trump.
Yeah.
Did everybody just hear that piece for the people who tell me, no, don't run independent, don't run third party? It's a waste of time. Listen to what she just said here.
Fact, but if they're given an alternative, viable third-party option, all of the folks in this focus group said that they would pick that person over Biden or Trump.
Yeah.
That piece right there is important. This is, once again, we have two people Americans, for the most part, don't want. Yes, of course, Trump has his base. He's still going to have that base. But when it comes down between the two, how many people want either one? So here we go again. Now, there's more from this focus group. Again, shout out to Case Study QB for this. Do you think that the 19% comes from people who would prefer Bernie Sanders to be the nominee, unlike the last time around? So this is important. Let me go ahead to this one. I hope this is the right. Yeah.
Demanding a Democratic debate. A new focus group revealing some swing voters in Georgia want President Biden to go toe-to-toe with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Shannon Bream, host of Fox News Sunday. How you doing, Shannon? Good morning to you on a Friday morning, as you would say. Friday, here we go. Now,
I would.
What's the chance that these two men are on a debate stage together?
I don't think it's very strong, but it is interesting because there are calls across the board coming for some kind of conversation about this. I mean, Axios talked to a group of Georgia swing voters about what they wanted to see and, you know, whether they would vote Democrat, where they would go. And they really want to see some kind of debate. One of the folks that they talked to in this focus group said, I want to know that whoever's going to be my president will be able to come up with coherent thoughts, no flashcards, no help. I want to see them debate. And so I want to see it happen on the primary stage. RFK Jr.'s name keeps coming up. Our polling just a couple of weeks ago showed that 19% of Democratic primary voters said that they would pick him over President Biden. So
that's a different poll. That's the Fox News poll.
There's a hunger and a thirst there for this.
Shannon,
but I can't imagine the DNC allowing that. Do you think that 19% comes from people who would have preferred Bernie Sanders to be their nominee the last time around? Yeah, it's possible. And whether they actually, when it comes down to it, if we have a rematch of 2020, do they stay home or do they say, no, I'm going to go out and pick President Biden over President Trump? It's a good question. I don't know. But the fact that he showed up so strong, I think gave the White House a little bit of pause.
Guys, I don't know what to tell you other than the fact that, again, people want a debate. Even for me, like I told you, I don't support this strategy of people running through the Democratic Party as progressives, the whole Bernie Sanders thing. I don't support that strategy anymore because, as I just told you with the discussion with Norm tonight, it's already fixed. It's already fixed. Okay. The DNC, corrupt, corporate. That being said, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to debate. And I support them having the opportunity to debate. I think that should happen. I think that Joe Biden should be challenged on a debate stage. And I think that if you have people running against him, those people should be able to debate him. I can't even believe this is even a question. Can't even believe it. That's actual democracy for the people like Rokana, who's like, we got to protect our democracy. That's democracy. Now, here's the question. I want to talk about who could host these debates because we keep talking about whether or not the DNC will go back on their word and allow it to happen. I say, why even wait for all that? Why even wait for all that? Why can't someone who is large enough that everybody knows host these debates? And I think there's someone that can do that. Here's that person. Listen to this.
Radio host Charlemagne the God is fed up with the DNC for not scheduling any primary debates this election cycle. Watch.
It's whack that the DNC won't let nobody they won't do no primaries next year, man. Do a primary debate. Put Joe Biden up on that stage with Bobby Kennedy, who's challenging him, and Marianne Williamson, and whoever steps up to the plate, and let's have a discussion, yo.
Fox. Charlemagne the God should host the debates. You guys asked me and Kim, and I deferred to Kim. I deferred to Kim. And Kim said what? She told you it should be on a larger platform, even larger than hers. And she has a large platform. She's like, maybe it should happen on Twitter or something like that. Charlemagne the God would actually be the right person to do this. He is a host. He has a radio show. Most people know who he is. He gets a lot of views. He's a popular person and he's independent. So people can't say, oh, he's being partisan and he's, Like he's independent. He should host it. Tell him I said so. I remember like back in the day, some of you guys may not remember this, but when I was in undergrad at the University of South Carolina, Charlemagne the God used to do the radio in Columbia, South Carolina. A lot of people don't remember this. I remember he was local. He lived next door to my best friend. This is back in the day. But he used to have a radio show in Columbia, South Carolina. And I remember when he announced that he was moving up to New York to work on the Wendy Williams show. See, I remember all this stuff. He didn't just get there like that. He started from the bottom and worked his way up. But he should do it. He should be the one to host the debates. We'll go on a little bit more here.
News contributor Joe Concha joins us now. Good morning, Joe. I got to put this in context for anyone who may not remember who Charlemagne is. So this is when he spoke to then candidate Biden back in 2020. Listen.
More questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man.
So now that we know the relevance of Charlemagne and why this is so relevant right now, do you think the more pressure that people put on the DNC to have these debates, that they might actually do it?
I would hope so. The problem is it's only Charlemagne, who I worked with actually over at WOR in New York a couple of years ago, and he's an authentic guy. I talked to him several times. You listen to his radio show. I like the fact he doesn't hold back, doesn't care about what party you belong to. But the Democratic National Committee, this is all an effort to ensure the Biden basement strategy is deployed to its full effect once again during the primary process and beyond. And look, you just showed the polls. Joe Biden is at his lowest level in polling history for a president at this time in their presidency. The president was asked just yesterday, as you just played, what was the last country you were at? And I get if you haven't traveled in a while, but he was just there last week. We're talking about Ireland, and he couldn't remember. And that's why he's being kept off this debate stage. He can't answer basic questions. And the same goes for Donald Trump, by the way, too, who says he's not going to debate as well during the primary season. No, this isn't a coronation. You have to defend your policies, your ideas. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. You cannot have this process without debating your opponents. Both the RNC and the DNC should stand up and say, we're going to hold these debates for all candidates, and you all must show up. But I have a feeling that's not going to happen because we're in a coronation process, not an electoral process, it appears at this point, guys.
He hit the nail on the head. No, we're not in an electoral process, and we don't have a true democracy. And that's why something like this can happen. And most people won't even say anything. That's a big part of the problem. Just keeping it real. But again, you guys can pass it on. I think Charlemagne should host the debates. He has that large platform that Kim was talking about. He has it. What multi-mind? Sabrina, you want to interview Orange Man, Biden as well? No. I don't think this would be a good place for them to come to. Could you imagine? Oh, man. First question I could ask someone like Joe Biden, and that would be the end of the interview. They'll be like, his campaign, his team would say, all right, we're going to go ahead and cut this one short. No, I don't think so. Banhammer said Russell Brand should host it. He doesn't throw softballs. Him too. Maybe they could do it together. Maybe it could be Russell Brand and Charlemagne. But I agree that I think it needs to be somewhere else other than YouTube, because not everybody tunes into the political YouTube, and Twitter has even more followers. So Heartless Media. Oh, Kit, I'm coming. I'm over time. Charlemagne, Joe Rogan, Jimmy Dore, and Russell Brand. That would be crazy, right? I don't know if Jimmy would do it though, because I think Jimmy's like tired of the whole electoral process. I'm not sure if he would do it, but that would be lit. And that would get a lot of viewers and people would tune in. But I really do think, you guys, that they're trying to prevent Joe Biden from talking as much as possible because they don't want people to see that he's in decline. I think that's partly what this is about. There is still a chance a corporate Democrat may come forward. I would not be surprised if someone like Joe Manchin decides to run. He's been hinting at that before. I think it's laughable, though, but you never know. You never know. All right, Eric, I am going to take a very quick break. If you want to hop on and tell people about 11 demands and the stream we're about to head to. I think I got a couple of comments starred that need to be highlighted as well. Thanks.
Sure, we can make that happen. All right, let me adjust my camera here, and we will get into this stuff. Yeah, so it was quite an interview there with Norman Finkelstein. He can certainly talk, but yeah, it was good. Interesting stuff. All right, first, comments here on our stream. We got, thanks for the super chat, Kinky. The Democratic Party prefers Trump over RFK Jr. Thanks for that. And thanks for the super chat from the King 1300. 35% consists of total voters. Among Democrat voters, it's 62 Biden versus 19 RFK. Thanks for that. And thanks for this super chat from Avery Bella. I really appreciate you speaking truth and giving your great perspective. Thanks for that. From Mr. Roger Meadows, we got Georgians want them $2,000 checks. Yeah, they're still waiting, right? And thanks for the super chat. And Buster Peak, what are your thoughts about the new streaming service on Twitter? Yeah, we'll be seeing where and how that goes on this Twitter and streaming and video. All right, let's kick over there. Let's see what we got on the old Rockfins. There we go. Let me shift this around a little bit. There we go. Thanks for this tipped comment on Rockfin hemp car. When Athenians, or Native Americans really, created democracy, they had courtyard debates. The ones who didn't go were called idiotus. You can't have democracy without debates, and the ones we do have are staged. This is the very foundation of democracy. When a person spoke, we refrained from words of accusation and blame. Nat Hunt said, MLK said this gentle monk knows and can bring ecumenicism. Thanks for that, hemp car. And we got one here, also on the Rockfins, from Roger Meadows. Whoa, independent Sab, Charlemagne, who was out here stumping for Cam in the D's. I agree he'd be great, but I don't know about independent. Thanks for that, Roger. All right, so now what we got coming up is on my channel, we're going to have another episode of Forum 11 with, we should be having Sabby and Kit Cabela. So let me put in the stream right now. All right, there we go. So there's our link to this next stream that we want you all to hop over to, and we'll be getting that going. You can also get there if you go to 11demands.org. The link is also up there. But we're going to be talking with Sabrina and Kit about the demand-based strategy, about, can we kind of step out of the news cycle a little bit and talk about how we can really get to, the next step and the next level, and what can really work. So that should be a really good discussion coming up right now. Now I'm going to give you this link once more. And we are going to see you over there. All right. And then when Sabby comes back, she'll hit the pause on this stream, and we'll cut. I know it's a little chaotic. It's a Friday night. We're just here having fun. So, So please do head over there. And now I'm going to jump over to there, and we'll put this one on pause, and we'll see you over on what's the muttering. Hey, this isn't easy. All right. So we'll see you over on the next stream.
Okay, have a good night. Keep up the fight.